Welcome to Taft, our New York Botanical Garden Lecture Series. Once again, we're graced tonight by Dr. Scott Mori from the New York Botanical Garden. Dr. Mori's latest book, Tropical Plant Collection, From the Field to the Internet, shares knowledge and experiences designed to make it both easier and safer for others to conduct biological research in the tropics. Recently retired, and therefore very happy, Dr. Mori was the Nathaniel Lord Britton Curator of Botany at the NYBG. He is a member of the adjunct faculty at City University of New York, Center for Environmental Research and Conservation at Columbia, and the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. He holds the David Fairchild Medal for Plant Exploration and the Asa Gray Award by the American Society of Plant Taxonomists for lifetime achievement. So, very pleased to introduce Dr. Mori to us again. He has a very exciting talk to lend to us tonight. And I would also like to mention that this series is made possible by the generosity of the Yerkes Family Botanical Art and Science Speakers Fund. Wonderful people who love to see more science taught to more people. So please join me in welcoming Dr.
This is the third lecture that I've given here, actually. I have a great deal of affection for the Taft School. And one of the reasons is I've had a wonderful research assistant that came on an internship with me 2 years ago. Her name is Camilla Chung. Some of you may still remember Camilla.
Yes.
And she did this internship. She learned all of the steps about doing botany, going into the field, photographing the plants, making specimens of the plants, identifying those plants, and putting the information onto the internet. So she was really one of the sparks. We got so much done simply because of her presence there. Now I just retired, 39 years at the New York Botanical Garden. I'm happy mostly because I don't have to go in there every single day. And because I can do it, I don't have to write grant proposals unless I want to, and I don't have to attend meetings. But basically, I love my job. I never found one day that I didn't feel like I was having a great time at the job, because exploring for tropical plants is a great thing to do. Now, why am I here and why am I not working on tropical plants yet? Well, I still am doing it through my students I have 2 guys in Brazil, 1 person in Ecuador, and 1 person in Panama that are studying the ecology and systematics of the Brazilian family. And I have constant dealings with them. It's almost like I live vicariously. And I still go down to South America, short expeditions, and go to meetings and so forth. But I wanted to do something where I could be more active as a local proponent for botany. And one of my goals is to make it so there are more people that care about plants and animals that are associated with them that don't care. And I think that's really one of the things. We've lost the feeling of society that it just doesn't make any difference if the species is gone. I mean, we went last week, we were down in Nebraska and we saw the sandhill crane migration. There were about 200,000 birds there at the time, and there are 500,000 birds. I mean, this is one of the most spectacular aggregations of birds that you can see in the United States. And it just tells you that we're actually the people, human beings are the ones that are saying whether a species is going to survive or not. The sandhill crane is a good example of this, because the sandhill crane needs very specific kinds of habitats to live in. They spend some time away from the river, and they eat things. In the old days, they were frogs and insects and so forth, with those very strong bills that they have. But now they're eating corn. So that corn is there because of human beings. Now the farmers don't get mad at them because there's a lot of waste in harvesting corn, so there's a lot of corn left in the field. So now the bird has changed its diet considerably, and 80% of its diet comes from corn. The real problem is then they come back and they can't roost in trees. But what they do is they spend their nights on sandbars with an isolated area between the sandbar and the shore. So anything that walks into that water, they have very good hearing and they can hear those predators coming out to them. And it's very difficult to maintain that size of a habitat, that kind of a habitat. So human beings have to go in there and actually build up the sandbars, make it a little bit deeper between the sandbars and the shore. Now, let's get into the slides. So I was a tropical botanist, and I'm from the state of Wisconsin, where if you take a hectare of land, which is about the size of 2 American football fields, you will find in there, on trees that are over 10 centimeters in diameter, 300 different species of trees there. And they're almost always up into the canopy of the forest. And I've seen spectacular things, just the general view going up into that forest. But some of the things that I've seen have been spectacular views of nature in action. And I want to tell you just one of those things, and that was my encounter with a group of spider monkeys. I was in French Guiana when it was the dry season, and the dry season is a time of food shortage. The spider monkeys eat mostly fruits. And there was a tree that was in fruit, but the fruit wasn't quite mature. But those monkeys knew it was going to be mature. So they were alerted when I started using my spikes to go to the top of this tree. And I'm reaching up to cut down the branch so I could make a specimen. Now, mind you, I wasn't going to take all of their fruits. I was just going to take a few fruits, and so I could know the name of it and use it as part of my collections. Well, the monkeys heard this commotion there, and then I saw them. There were 4 of them. They were about 50 yards away from the tree, and they were making, nasty noises at me and stuff, and they started getting closer and closer and getting louder and louder, and then they got right into the tree, which is they came down about the top of the screen from me. They started breaking branches off and throwing branches after me. They even did a worse thing, they urinated on me. And these spider monkeys are the most mischievous ones that you can possibly run into. Now they're skinny and they don't weigh much. I could probably throw them around, but up in a tree I didn't want to have to do that. So I took my long pole that I used for cutting the specimens and I just poked it up at them, and they ran away as fast as they could. But I'm sure, there were plenty of fruits for them to eat later on. I studied in particular one fantastic group of trees called the Brazil nut family. It's the biggest nut in a can of mixed nuts. So here you see these round cannonball-like things in the top of the tree, and they're very woody. And they have this little hole in them. So the seeds can't get out of there because the seeds are bigger than the opening that they would get out of. Now, most of the other species have a great big opening, and there are different rewards for getting the dispersal agents in there, and they fall out of the fruit itself. But this goes to the ground, and this is the reason that it can be harvested, and it yields to us the biggest nut in the can of mixed nuts. That's the Brazil nut, which is actually a seed, and it's not a nut. So not only did I have the beautiful tropical rainforest to work in, but I also had a plant family that had everything that anybody would want to study. Gorgeous flowers. That flower is about that big, has a tremendous aroma, it's pollinated by bees, and its fruits are carried away by monkeys. And from that flower that you see there, it's radially symmetrical. Species have evolved that have zygomorphic flowers or bilaterally symmetrical flowers. And there's that. See that ring that you saw in the more primitive kind of thing, it has an outgrowth that grows down like this, and it has stamens that are sterile, that produces sterile pollen for the pollinator to eat. When the pollinator goes in there, it touches its head and back up against that, and it's a she. Anytime the pollen is a reward, it's a she that's going after that. This little thing here does all kinds of different things. It starts turning in. Some species have it turned in a little ways. Others have a complete coil that go around there. And the pollinators are different depending upon how complex that flower is. And it's been some of the most exciting times in my career in the last 10 years when I was able to combine knowledge of the plants along with the molecular biological studies that we're able to do nowadays. And I want to just make a plug for doing the botany and the zoology. If you go into fields that might be, conservation or any other field where you actually deal with these plants and animals, One of the things I encourage is you take some of the general courses. Learn about general botany, learn about general zoology, because these give you a great appreciation for the organisms that you work with, as well as you can understand if you do evolutionary studies like me. I was the one that didn't make the trees, but I knew exactly what those trees told me. This is one of the fruits of this family. When I was a little bit older than you, I was coming back to the United States with 5 of these, and they thought I had robbed the graveyard of the Amerindians that lived in there. So now this is my backyard. It's a very nice substitute for the tropics. It's absolutely gorgeous, and there are many, many interesting things to do, and there are many conservation problems that we have to address. And most people are not familiar with the kinds of things that that are happening to our woods. And I just want to make you aware of these things. Probably most of you have not learned about them yet, but eventually we will, because our forests in Westchester County, where I'm from or live, they're damaged. And those damages cause from a number of different things that's more or less attacking the forest. This doesn't mean that every single forest in New York State has been totally compromised. Although I want to point out that wildflowers, they're having a very hard time. They don't exist in areas where my wife remembers them. There were hundreds and hundreds of them. The only places where you can go now to see these flowers in our immediate areas is go down to White Plains and go to the Saxon Woods, and you can see a whole series of wildflowers there. It's because they're isolated from the deer population. It's all city around them, and they don't have to contend with deer munching on their flowers and their leaves. The other reason I chose to work on this project, not just to entertain myself, I'd go crazy if I didn't have the chance to get into the field, is because we have the Westchester Land Trust there. And we have a population of people that's very, very interested in keeping destructions of our forest from happening. And so they're actively buying land, they're making connections between different reserves. They are fantastically preserving the area that we live in. You know, we're a rural community, and we want to see a lot of forest remaining there. The other point that before I start talking about this is that there's a thing called changing benchmarks. I know what a woodlot around here looks like, especially my wife looked like 50 years ago. Full of wildflowers. I know the way I grew up in Wisconsin, there were lots and lots of wildflowers there. And that's changed. And this is called changing benchmarks. And what I want to do is use the cod as an example. When this country was first settled, there was cod all along the shoreline. So in order to catch them, all you had to do is go out there and take a net and pull them in, and you had enough cod to feed the entire population of the little city that you may have lived in. Now you can't do that. There are no cod essentially along the shoreline, and cod, the entire populations of cod, no matter where they were, have been compromised. Now they've made a little bit of comeback because there have been stops on their fishing. So what we need to do is teach you that not to just make your decision about whether something is a good forest or not a good forest based on the current time that you're looking at it. You have to know about these things that have compromised our forests as well. And I don't want you know, when you look at this, you'll see some of these problems that we have. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate, really, that what is going to be left on this earth is up to us. Human beings are going to decide what's left on Earth. If we're going to let a species go extinct or not go extinct. The real important thing, however, is we're going to have to stop this before it starts destroying, this destruction that we're having starts destroying the ecosystem services of the world. Polluting the air that we breathe, polluting the water that we drink, all of the other things that are going on right now that all of you, I'm sure of, are aware of, are going to have to be more actively involved in the conservation of these kinds of resources if we're going to see, the kind of lifestyle and the kind of environment that we've had in the past. Now this quote here, the light of noonday was obscured by an eclipse. The dove fell in spots not unlike melting flakes of snow, and the continued buzz of wings had a tendency to fill my senses to repose. Who wrote that? What about that? And here's what happened to those passenger pigeons. There were so many passenger pigeons that darkened the sky when they flew over, and they flew over for days. You stand out watching these birds go over. Now, we just passed the 100th anniversary of Martha, who was the last passenger pigeon to survive in captivity. There are no passenger pigeons left. Some people think they're going to make passenger pigeons again by using the DNA that's in the stuffed specimens that have been collected. But they've got to use a living passenger pigeon to put the DNA into, so that's not really going to be like a passenger pigeon. And you can see, how these birds were hunted. Not only shot, but they had big nets, and then they put grain in those nets, and they pulled these nets and captured all these passenger pigeons at the same time. This has happened over and over and over again with animals. It is without doubt that human beings have caused the extinction of these animals. So, how can we ignorantly step aside and let this continue to happen? Every chance we get to write a letter or to take the side of nature, we have to take that opportunity. Now here's the kind of spring wildflowers that I like to see. Columbine, and there are bluebells in there, etc. If you go to other parts of the world, or this particular state even, if you go further to the north, there's not that much of a problem. There's still wildflowers like this. We took these pictures, my wife did, about 60 miles north of here. And so they still beautiful areas exist. But here's what's happening to the woods in our area. If you do an exposure, well, here's what the woods look like right now. They're totally barren. These leaves have flushed out already. There are no wildflowers under there. Why are there no wildflowers? Well, that's what the rest of the talk is going to be about. The number one enemy is the white-tailed deer. They love it in Westchester County because the habitat that we create for them, the woodlands adjacent to homes, to the various gardens that we have, you can't actually grow anything in Westchester County without actually putting a fence around there. But it promotes deer populations to get at very high levels. A normal forest 100 years ago would have 5 to 10 different individuals of deer living in that particular area. You can see in some of the areas, in one area, they're raised to 63.7. That was the Pound River Reservation. And this year they decided to hunt these deer, and they're not even dropped down to anywhere near where they wouldn't be destroying the wildflowers. Now, it's a very sensitive thing to talk about killing deer. But you got to keep if you want the other organisms, the other reason that they're abundant there is because they have no natural predators. They used to be hunted by wolves as well as coyotes. Now coyotes are making a comeback. Has anybody seen a coyote? Yeah, so have I. And the coyote occasionally, we live on the edge of a lake, and they occasionally bring down a deer. And so I don't have, friends of ours have these camera traps. They get great pictures of these coyotes, feeding on the deer like that. But without those predators, the population increases. So that's really number one. And here's a deer. They like to be around us, and most of us like them. We all get excited when we see the deer. But they eat not only wild plants. This is something that grows in our yard, actually. It's an introduction from Europe. It doesn't like anything but the flowers, so it nibbles off the flowers. And it doesn't make any difference, they are cultivated plants, they're wild plants, etc. In order to grow these things outside of a fence, you have to spray a deer repellent on them. And here's a deer exposure. It seems pretty apparent that this is outside of the area and has very few species of plants. This dense thing here is a sedge, so it doesn't have very much diversity. When you get inside of it, after time, the actual wildflowers and the other plants will reappear again. Because many of these plants have seeds that get into the soil and they last for a very long period of time. The bracken fern, which doesn't have a seed but has a spore, will germinate 200 years after it's been resting in the soil for 200 years. So there's a very long time of survival in the soil. So these things can actually be, the deer can be blocked out and you will get some recuperation of the wildflowers. Now what I want to do is talk about enemy number 2. And this is the barberry. This one is a European barberry. This one was introduced in the United States as an ornamental. It has a different kind of leaf than the one we have now that I'll tell you about later on. This one has a whiter underside of the leaf and it has little hairs that grow along the edge. And this species was the alternate host for the wheat rust. So it had a life cycle and it would be on the wheat and then it would go back in and overwinter on these, you can see the cycle there. And so without the barberry there, the wheat wouldn't be attacked by this. So the United States Agricultural Department made a big campaign to get rid of these things, and they did a very good job of it. They got rid of most of them. They left a few, and that actually has caused a little bit of a problem that I'll talk about in a second or two. Here the no wildflowers are, and the plant that you're seeing right here is the barberry. This is the Japanese barberry. And the Japanese barberry, remember the way the fruits hung down in the other one? They're in a little cluster in this one. They don't have that long rachis that the fruits hang to. And this has all kinds of adaptations for being an alien that can survive as an invasive plant. When I showed the previous slide, you saw an understory that had nothing except some green bushes. And about a week or 2 from now, you'll see the Japanese barberry starting to put out its leaves. And that's a tremendously important, advantageous way of this plant surviving or outcompeting the normal native plants. Because they're out there and they photosynthesize like wildflowers, which are called spring ephemerals. The ones that flower in the springtime, flower before the leaves leaf out. They then produce their seeds and they photosynthesize and they store enough energy, for the underground parts to survive and come up the next year. Now what happens with the barberry, it starts producing its leaves before the wildflowers come up and start doing their photosynthesis. And that means that they are outcompeted for light. And they just can't survive. That's only one thing that the barberry does. The flowers are also tremendously interesting. And this is what I like to do, is I like to actually not just take a picture of the plant, but get in there and take a picture of all of the things that you see inside of the plant. I like to say from my research that I did everything. I counted chromosomes, I cut the wood, I chopped into the leaves and looked at all those different characteristics of it. Now look just at this one plant, how spectacular it is. This is the stamen. Here's the anther with all this pollen out here. If you look carefully, you see it's all out there. This thing opens up not with a slit down the anther, but it opens up a little window there that lets the pollen come out. The other important thing is that these alien plants oftentimes attract lots of pollinators. This one has a nectary at the base of each one of the petals. It produces nectar, and that is the reward for insects and stuff to go in there and pollinate. So these plants produce a tremendous number of fruits. They also have a defense. They have thorns, which are modified branches. So any deer that goes in there, tries to graze on those leaves, is not going to want to do that because it's going to be stuck by those thorns. And what I found to be most spectacular is the underground root system of it. Now, you can eliminate these barberry plants relatively easily if you get them when they're small. You just go with a pair of gloves, reach down, and pull them out. But what happens is, if once they get bigger, you can't do this. I actually did this with this particular plant because it wasn't very big and it was quite easy. It has a taproot, and it goes down deep. And if it's big enough, the taproot goes down so deep that you break it off. And when you break it off and haul the top away, it's going to sprout again from that taproot, so you haven't gotten rid of it. Now, somebody told me, well, you can actually kill these things by put your gloves on, take your hand along the branches and pull off all the leaves. I went out to do that, and it works. But you have to do it all, for 10 times. I mean, you would never want to do that. But it does effectively. You can eventually, if you have the persistence on doing that, you could get rid of these things. But why do that when you can pull them out? They even make tools for pulling these things out. The thing that I didn't know, though, is this has a diffuse root system that spreads out underneath all the wildflowers and all of the other plants in that particular area. So water falls there, nutrients are there, etc., and they're all gobbled up by the Japanese barberry and not being left for the plants, the wildflowers that are normally there, used to be there. It's easy to tell. All you have to do is break the root system is very bright yellow. Now, does anybody, when they go home or when they go down to New York City, you ever drive along the Sawmill River Parkway?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's a plant there that everybody thinks is the kudzu. No. This is not. This is one that came to the area about the same time that I went up there 12 years ago. And this now is actually one of the most impressive things you could ever see. Right now, there's nothing there. A month from now, there'll be leaves on these plants. They're woody vines that go to the tops of the trees, and they smother out every single other plant that's under them. Now, I had my machete, tropical botanists always have a machete with them. So I wanted to photograph what was underneath there, and I got out and I took my machete and I was chopping away, and I heard a siren coming out of the car. What is this guy doing there? And I looked under there, there's not a thing growing under there. Absolutely nothing. Am I going backwards? No, okay, all right, yeah. So this has a little humus on the forest floor. There are a few leaves and stuff, but there are worms under there, and those worms are very efficient at eliminating that layer of humus that's needed for wildflowers to do well. Everybody thinks worms are wonderful. Well, maybe they're wonderful in gardens, but in this particular habitat, they were all wiped out by the glaciers. There were no native worms to the north of the glacier line. And so what's happening is that these worms have been introduced back into these habitats, but they're not the native ones that used to be there. There are native worms further to the south of us. The ones in our particular area above the glacier line are all introduced worms, and they were introduced for fish bait, for composting, and these other things. You have to be very, very careful with composting. And so you'll see they're slowly moving further to the north, and they're causing a great problem. So here's what you have with the migration of the worms. There's a glacial area where that glacier recedes, the worms are going to the north. And here's an example of the duff in our backyard. We don't have any wildflowers that grow there, maybe just once in a while, an occasional one. It's hard-baked soil, and there have been a lot of studies on this, and it's been shown that these are negative invaders for local growth of wildflowers. So this is a trillium that actually grows in an area where it's further to the north and the worms haven't gotten there. Now I want to talk about a couple other things. Another enemy is acid rain. This person here used to be the director of the Cary Arboretum. His name is Gene Likens. And Gene was the one that didn't discover acid rain because the Europeans already knew about acid rain. But he's the one that made it aware of in the United States. And he had a research area, or still does have a research area, up in New Hampshire called Hubbard Brook. And he's been studying there for 60 years. So he's watched what has gone along. And this is where he discovered that the waters were acidic inside of the reserve that he studies in. And they were killing off the life in the streams and so forth of the area. So they finally campaigned enough and didn't get rid of the acid rain. There still is a little bit of acid rain, enough for us to worry about. But it's much, much better than it used to be. That acid rain was caused by the sulfur and nitric acid and stuff that came from the west. And so you see sulfuric acid and what's the other one? Nitric acid that would come down on these things. A lot of plants were just killed outright. They couldn't survive those acids. Okay, so he more or less got rid of acid rain, but he kept working in his site. And what he began to notice is that the trees weren't growing. The total number of the wood that was being produced was exactly equal by the wood that was being lost. And so you got a situation where there was no sequestration of carbon, the process of photosynthesis. When you stop that, what you have is those forests are very slow to get back to old growth forests. They probably never will. And my wife gets sick of me talking about these things, but when I look into the forest, I see an aged forest. It's not a forest that the pioneers saw with great big trees in there, with big white pines and so forth. And the whole successional process is delayed by a great deal. Maybe once it gets to a certain point, who knows if it's going to succeed even into old growth forest. One thing about old growth forest, it has denser wood. And if it has denser wood, that means that old growth forests sequester more carbon than earlier growth forests, the secondary forests. Old growth forests also have more niches in them. There are mosses that grow on the tree trunks, there are lichens, etc. There are many more of those other plants, vines and plants that grow along the understory than there are in secondary forests. So that's also capture of nitrogen by that greater diversity of plants that are there. Now, here's one of the things that is, of course, happening that we all know about. Most of us would agree that this increase in CO2, which has been monitored in Hawaii for many, many, many years, is exactly timed with the Industrial Revolution. You see that sequestration, that accumulation of carbon in the atmosphere along the time when we went into the Industrial Revolution. It has profound effects on plants because plants, they photosynthesize at an optimum temperature about 68 to 70 degrees or so. And when it warms up too much, as all these lines represent different plants, and the downturn is when they're getting out of the temperature range in which they photosynthesize the best. What does that mean? It means that they're not going to sequester, the vegetation type that those live in, they're going to become less dense. They're going to move towards a desert kind of vegetation. And then another whole kind of photosynthesis takes place that enables these plants to live in those hotter and drier kinds of habitats. But we're losing a lot of the sequestration of these kinds of plants because of increasing temperature. Now, of course, And what you have, when you have a decrease in sequestration, the trees and stuff weaken. Remember 3 years ago we had that horrible storm before the leaves fell off the trees? And they weighed so much that they broke the branches down. And this is what you had the following spring. Now fortunately we haven't had another occurrence like that since then. But the trees are just so weak. They were uprooted, they crashed down, and that's a situation when you don't have sequestration, a normal, healthy kind of forest. So what do I want to do something that will help the area that I live in, keep me entertained so my wife won't have to worry about me so much, and to just do some good for the area that I work in. Well, I looked around and at all the reserves that are in Westchester County, and I decided that I would do a total inventory of all the plants and fungi, including the lichens of that particular area. And I talked people into doing this, people in fungi and people in lichens and other things. They went there and they did their inventories. But all we have then is a checklist from them. I mean, we have this checklist that says, here's what grows here at this particular time. It's not going to allow anybody actually to identify anything there. And it's not going to allow people to know what those plants are like. So for the ferns, even with the mushrooms and with the flowering plants, we're doing a lot more. I'll tell you what that is. Here's one of the young men. He's an IT person, but he loves nature and he loves fungi and he knows them better than probably any person in the Westchester County area. So he and this young woman here is Carol, a Brazilian lawyer, who came to the botanical garden with her husband, who's doing his PhD on ferns. And the minute she came around looking for a job, and the minute she came in there, I knew she would do a great job. She took over the inventory of the fungi up until the time that she was going to have a baby, and then Zach came in and started working with her to do this inventory. This one is Camilla. Camilla was tremendously important because she did everything. She, went through the whole stage of it. This is Carol's husband, Fernando. He's the guy that's doing the ferns. And here's me pressing the plants. For every single photograph that we have, we actually have a specimen in the herbarium that documents what that is. So if somebody in the future thinks that our identification of that species is incorrect, they can go and look at the actual specimen. The other thing we've done is we've scanned all those specimens. So when you want to know what a species is, say that you are working on the buttercup family and you want to know what Ranunculus acris looks like. You go there, you click on it, and all of the specimens that have been made on that particular species come up. And so all of the images that are associated with that particular collection come up and allow you to see the pictures, get a description of the plants. You can go into the database and you can say white flowers, June, and you'll get a list of all of those specimens that were collected that had white flowers in June, so you can scroll down through them and get a pretty good idea of what you're looking at. So and here's what I love, is that you then look at these plants in very great detail. Most people, when they photograph wildflowers, will take a picture of them. They don't take a picture of the things that are important for identifying the plants. This is a wild geranium. The root system is oftentimes not used very much for identification of plants, but it's very useful for identifying them. The flower structure, look into this amazing flower. You'll show you get the picture of the female part of the flower, the male part of the flower, and you look at it from different angles. So you see from the underside of the flower, this one is very easy to identify because of this long tail that comes out from the end of the calyx bulb here. And the fruit. Now this year I've got to get a fruit that opens up. It has a way of exploding. It comes up and coils out, the seeds are thrown away. So my goal is just to entertain myself, to put all of the information that I can possibly put online so other people can appreciate these plants. And here's the first website that we tried. I'm a very impatient guy, so at the New York Botanical Garden, we have an IT staff for science of 2 people. And they're inundated with work. They can't possibly do it. So I decided, look, I'm going to go to a scratch pad, to a system that's done by the Europeans. And they have this thing that people are supposed to use for making their pages, their information on plants available to the world. Well, the thing is, it doesn't work. And I wanted it to work so badly that I spent 6 months working on that thing. Now I'm back, and it looks like the garden's IT people have finally listened to me, and we're going to put the other one online within the next month. So these are what my goals are, and I want to go through these very rapidly because you can read them. I really want to make a total inventory. Now I've been on to this sort of thing for a long time. I did an inventory of Saba, a little island that has 5 square miles. It's in the Caribbean. And it was a lot of fun, but what usually happens is the funding runs out. You get the donating institutions, they stop funding the thing because it takes so long to do it. In this case, that wasn't the case. The funds did run out, but it was a person who wanted to see the project done. He left the organization, the Nature Conservancy. I want to actually get every single species of flowering plants, and I want to make keys to the flowering plants. And the way I can do this, and I have a glossary, so anytime you want to identify something and I have a term there that you don't understand, you'll be able to go to the glossary, and that will be illustrated, and you'll know what that is. And basically what it enables you to do is have a box with all the characters. On the screen, there are 4 squares in it. One is with all the characters that I know for those plants. So the first key that I would have would be a key to the different groups of plants. Say, maybe I would have something, all leaves that are 10 times longer than wide. So you get all the grasses, all the sedges, some of the monocots, etc. And then I have a more detailed key for doing that. So when I clicked on that first thing, that character that said long leaves, it would eliminate everything that doesn't have the long leaves. And then there's a button up there that you click that gives you the next best results. So it gives you a list of things that you can collect, that you can click on, that will give you the best, get rid of the most of the other ones. The ones that are originally in that right-hand square, you have all of the species. So they keep getting progressively eliminated as you go through characters. The characters that you use get eliminated, they go down the left-hand square, and the ones that are eliminated of the different species go down the right-hand square. And every single step along the way, it says if is there a paleo? You click on that particular term, and you get the term, it shows you exactly what the term is. So eventually you'll get done. You will always get an answer. Sometimes that answer will be 3 or 4 things, and you have to look at the pictures of all of those to get them. If you're lucky, you're going to go right down there and you're going to get them all. Now what I want to do is I want to make an app so people can actually, we would have these things at the Westchester Land Trust, and school children would be able to come there and take those things, and I want to start a whole program where I actually give the lectures and then take them on a field trip, and then so that their teachers will know year after year that they will actually go into a native forest and know what it's like. So the rest of them I don't really have to tell you about, except for the last one. I want to make this one of the nicest things for the people in the United States to use as a model for doing it in their particular areas. And I encourage anybody at Taft that's interested. Right now I'm very interested in having people, if they're going to do class projects, I need to have people writing the descriptions and stuff of different invasive plants. Because for the invasive plants, we're going to have the pictures of the invasive plant, the descriptions of what they're like, etc. We're going to have how to control them. We're going to have, but the most important thing, we want people to be able to identify these things so they don't, for example, grow Japanese barberry in their front yard. Which happens. I mean, that's the biggest reason for having invasive plants is that people want to grow things that they see are beautiful. Carol and I were sitting having lunch in the Bartlett Arboretum, and we had that porcelain berry in back of us. And along comes a young couple, and they look at them. Look at those berries. Man, I mean, this thing is so gorgeous. We want to have this thing growing there. And that's what a lot of people want, a beautiful plant. Well, they'll have it growing there, and it will wipe out all of their other plants. Okay, thank you very much. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
So you heard about the Japanese barberry and how it's an invasive plant, and you also described kind of the method of pulling that out from the ground to kill it. How do you feel about using like toxic herbicides to kill invasive plants?
Well, I think it's a problem, and we're dumping all sorts of things. But there are some of these things, you know, you're not going to be able to get rid of. You have to. It's so labor intensive. For example, we found some new plants that are potential invasives. Well, we're going to cut them down, and we're going to go back there and we're going to keep cutting them down. But most people, what they do is they cut them down and they put a herbicide on them.
And does that
in turn, that will contribute to soil degradation. It'll kill a lot of the organisms that are living in the soil. These things are biocides. If it kills living cells, it kills living cells in everything. And we have a major problem with all these things. The labor to control invasive plants is unbelievable. Yeah. What you have to do is you have to know the preserve that you're in so well that you recognize a native plant. Has anybody ever heard of Japanese stiltgrass? Oh. Japanese stiltgrass is one that came to our neighborhood 10 years ago. And it just, every year, it got a little bit more and more and more. First, it was only found along the roadsides. And then it reached a tipping point, so it just has gotten it everywhere. So it's going into the understory, getting these wide swaths of this thing. And it's very hard to handle because when you pull up the plant, it doesn't do any good. Unless you do it before it seeds, because this is an annual plant. Its way of propagating is by seed. Already there are thousands and thousands and thousands of seeds in the soil. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to go back there for years. Who knows how many years you'd have to go back and pull these things out. And I know, I mean, you can control something like that in your own backyard, but to control it on a wider basis is very difficult. Any other questions? Yes.
What is the best way to educate young people about wildflowers?
Well, I think the best way to do it is what I do with my granddaughters. In the spring, when the flowers come out, one of them's 3 and she just loves things, and I just have her feel the bark of the trees and touch mosses and stuff. And then look at the flowers, and I show her the parts of the flowers and stuff. And she can, take a whiff of the flowers, and I think it's to get them in an early age. I was in an early age, was looking at plants. My wife was, her mother and her father, did a lot of hiking and stuff, so I mean, this is a way. We don't necessarily want them to become biologists, although that would be nice too. We just want them to appreciate this stuff. And that's what we don't have a problem with a group like you. I mean, most of you like nature. And you would understand when somebody says, well, let's not plant this because it could cause the other things. But there are a lot of people that don't have that kind of education. We have to reach them.
Do you think we should reintroduce wolves then in the eastern United States to knock down the deer population?
Well, you got me. I actually personally believe that we've got to control them ourselves. I mean, there are a few wolves that are showing up again now.
Yeah, the eastern timber wolf is hybridized with the coyote, so you're getting a larger coyote. Now, how about biological control of invasives? Is there any research to stop the porcelain berry or the barberry?
My opinion on biological control is basically it does work, but what else is it doing? Right. There are all the things that we don't see in that soil, all those organisms and stuff that are there. I mean, are we going to come and bring these things in there and let them loose and they'll go off to another plant, etc.? Now, the guys that do that, I saw one of them doing this for one of the soft flies, and he said, no, these organisms, these are bacteria that he's putting in there. these bacteria don't hurt anything else. I find that hard to believe. Anything else?
Seeds aren't nuts, or nuts aren't seeds?
That particular one, I have a blog on the website of the New York Botanical Garden. A seed is not a fruit, okay? The fruit of that Brazil nut is that big pod. The seeds develop from the ovules inside of the ovary. When the ovary develops into the fruit, the seeds are inside there. So that's an acorn is a fruit, has one seed on the inside. This one is actually, a seed. Okay, thank you very much for coming.